Hey guys, okay, wait.
We're never gonna get through this.
Wait, okay, I just realized we should have an introduction, like a brief introduction.
Yeah, sure.
Hello everyone, my name is Wesley,
I'm Nicholas.
and this video is to show off our Spring 2020 Senior Design project. It's called Synthe-Shaper, and it's an analog-style digital synthesizer using MIDI. And it features a touchscreen for intuitive drawing, and uses 4 modules so you can shift your sound to be whatever you want. First, we're going to take a brief look at the hardware. It revolves around a TI C2000 processor running in dual CPU mode, and it uses a MIDI DIN port on the right in orange, you can see, to communicate with any MIDI controller you want using UART. The SD card is used to store graphics information for the UI, and this PCB we made holds the touchscreen, buttons, rotary encoders, and all the stuff you need to navigate through the system. We originally had a design for an enclosure as well as more PCBs, but due to shutdowns, we weren't able to do that. For software, it's in dual CPU mode, so it's running in parallel. CPU 1 is controlling all the touchscreen stuff, and all the sound calculations are handled by CPU.
So this is like basically our code that we use for CPU one. We posted this all on a GitHub, and CPU two. So we have CPU one doing all the menu stuff, a bunch of ifs and else. And then here, this takes care of sound in, sound out, and all the effects and stuff. So
yeah, they communicate with each other. You set up everything you want on CPU 1, and it puts it all into a struct in C, and it essentially puts it in shared memory, and CPU 2 is able to read it, so it's able to update your parameters in real time.
yeah.
You want to go with the modules now?
Yep. So this is our beginning screen. We can just hit start. And so now we have our entire menu system. Basically divided into multiple sections here. We have these modules here. There's 4 of them. There's arpeggio, volume, unison, and filter. And I can go to them by turning this rotary encoder here. Now this here on the left here is the actual waveform viewer, so you can draw things. So for example, if I go to volume envelope, I can draw a volume envelope, and so that's the waveform viewer. The secondary module will be dependent on the first module. So for example, for volume, you can change the sustain position, and then for each other modules, you have different, you can perform further tweaking. And then the third parameter here is the speed, which we can control with this third rotary encoder, and that will specify how fast you're going through the sort of waveform viewer, basically.
So the first module we're going to talk about is the volume module. Most synthesizers or instruments define an attack, decay, sustain, or release for an instrument. But using Synthe-Shaper, you can define that yourself, and you can draw essentially how the volume changes over time. So you can make it short or long, or you can make it go up and down, and Nick's gonna show some different styles.
Yeah, so basically, so here I'm drawing the volume. You can see with the secondary module, as I've said before, you can change the sustain position. I think it's a little better. It's this little dash line that's moving around. That's the actual sustain. So if I hit a chord, it's gonna get stuck at this sustain position, and then if I release, can do the rest of the volume. I can also change the speed here, which will just be how fast it's going through. So for example, if I make the speed really low and I hold the chord, and then I let go, it takes a rather long time to go through the entire volume envelope. And there's some cool things that you can do with this. So for example, we found something that you really can't do with the piano is when you hit a key, have the volume increase back up. So it sounds more like a accordion more than like a piano. So if I put this the same position in the middle here, it's going to get stuck here at a low volume, and then I'm going to release and it's going to go back up in volume. So if I hold, let's change the speed and make it a little bigger. So if I hold a chord, you see it kind of got instantly like dim in volume. Then if I release, and when I release, it goes back up. So it does kind of like a cool little effect. And of course, there's a bunch of other things we can do. I've had a lot of fun doing staccato-like sound. So, staccato is just kind of like dotted notes. So for example, what you could do is you could have it increase and then just kind of like poke the screen. And you have these three little dots here. And in sound, it's gonna sound like staccato notes. Or we can just literally just do all staccato. And then it'll just, you can even, do whatever rhythm you want. And these are closer together, so it sounds faster at that point. So there you go. And yeah. Is there anything else I should show, Leslie?
I think that's good for that module. Let's just put it on a little piano for now. Cool.
Okay. Yeah.
So next, we're going to talk about unison. Unison is a form of additive synthesis, and what that is that our synthesizer revolves around using a square wave. And essentially, with additive synthesis, you take that same tone and you add extra voices on top of it. And so we have 1, 2, and 3 voices. So a second voice is added above the bass note, and the third voice is added below. And they are detuned by just a little bit based on what you put in the waveform window. So it makes it more of a rich, natural sound instead of just an electronic sound.
So yeah, right now if I have it on one voice, it's obviously not going to sound different than before because there's only one voice. But if I add a second voice here, at a relatively low detune, you're going to hear it be slightly different. Actually, if I switch back to one, you'll see one voice is much simpler, whereas 2 sound a bit like a richer sound. And you can also, if it's 3 voice, then sound even more rich. You just added voices to it.
What the waveform window controls is the amount of detune, and essentially that is how off the notes are from each other. So we made it so like 1 cent would be 1% of the way to the next note up, a semitone, and 100 cents would be 100% of the way to the next semitone. So if you have a really high detune like Nick has up here, it's going to sound really bad. But if you keep the detune down low between 5 to 15%, it just sounds like a natural.
And you can also have a detune that changes with time. And then, I could change the speed here, and the speed will change how fast the changing detune will happen. So if I have it here, you can hear it becoming more detuned and less detuned with time. So yeah.
Yeah, so usually you want to keep that pretty low unless you're going for a really ugly effect. Next, we're going to look at the filter. So a square wave is very frequency rich. There is, if you're playing at an A, you're going to have that A at however many hertz that is, and then you have lots of frequencies above it. So you can use the filter to filter out some of those frequencies and pass others to change the sound, the quality of the sound. So what our design does is it uses a bandpass filter, which selects frequencies within a certain band and then filters out the ones above and below it. And there's a variable minimum and maximum frequency, and you use the waveform viewer to oscillate between those two in whatever fashion you want.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys can see here, but the filter right now is crossed out. So you have the option of not having any filter if you want to. If you do want the filter, then you just press this first rotary encoder that activates it. And then you have this here, the min and max values for frequencies. So right now I'm not even having it varied. So it should just sound like a static, bandpass filter.
So if you have the filter really low, it sounds like it's coming like from another room.
Exactly. So right now the min is 450, right? So since I drew a line that's a bit above, so this is probably around 500, 550. as the center frequency. So that's what you're hearing here. If I had it higher here, it's going to sound, the center frequency is moving up, so it sounds a little bit higher. I can also change the max here and make it even more higher, or I can make it really low. And then of course you can have a lot of fun and have what's most interesting is to have a variable center frequency, like what you're seeing here. And in this case, essentially we're doing a wah-wah. So if I have the min here at 450 and max at 850, I have this variable center frequency. It's a bit slow, so I'm just going to increase the speed here a little bit. And then what's fun also is that you can change it while you're playing, and you'll actually hear it changing, the center frequency. So if I change max, and for example, let me decrease min because it sounds better if I have it at a low min frequency, and I'll vary max, and you guys will hear how it sounds like. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so I'm going to leave the filter for now, just because it might create sounds that we don't necessarily want. And we're going to look at our last module, and it's called arpeggio, and it also can be enabled or disabled by pressing the rotary encoder. And so arpeggio switches between the notes that you're playing in the order that they're pressed. And the waveform window adjusts the gate, which is the amount of space between each note. So right now, Nick put it at about a 50% gate, which means that between each note, it will occupy about half of that space. If the gate is higher, it will occupy more of the space. If it's lower, it will occupy less. And the secondary modules adjust the number of octaves. So right now it's at 1. So if you're just hitting one note, it'll just play that note over and over again. And if you switch to 2 or 3 or up to 5, it will play that note and then scroll through octaves. And right now, the frequency is very low, and that's our second module. So the frequency is how long it spins on each note. So right now it's at 1, so it spins 1 second on each note. So if you want a faster arpeggio, you increase the frequency. You can press multiple notes, and it will go all those before going to the next octave.
Yeah, so basically, if I press a chord, it also play in whatever order you actually hit the keys. So if I press like C, E, and G in a row, you see it's doing it in that order. But if I do it in reverse, if I hit G and then E and then C, it's just doing it in a different order. And you can see here, this is if I change the gate, so that as Wesley said, the distance between the notes, you actually hear it being more connected here and less connected here. So for example, if I have it at a very high gate, then it's going to be very legato or connected. But if I have it at low gate, it's going to sound way more detached or staccato. And of course, you can change that, as we said. So this is really a really fun thing to play with, especially when you increase the frequency, you can do some really nice sounds.
So if you increase the frequency even higher, it'll start to sound like an Atari almost. We can go up to 20 hertz. So that's fun to play around with, and it allows you to make some really cool sounding things without having to be very technically skilled.
Yep. So yeah, and then I guess the last thing that we can talk about is the folder system. So now let's say that we have our entire configuration here, and maybe we want to change it, but we don't want to lose this configuration. We can actually hit this save button here and save this configuration into a folder. So if I save it, say to folder 1, hit confirm. Now it's in folder 1. So for example, let's let's deactivate arpeggio. Let's maybe even change the volume. And then let's activate filter, for example. And then now we want this to be in a different module. We can hit save here and hit folder. Whoops. Try again. Let's hit full. Doesn't want me to. There we go. Folder 2. So now it's in folder 2. And and then these 4 buttons here will actually select between the 4 different folders. So if I hit here, you can see here it updated to folder 1. So in that folder, we had arpeggio activated, filter deactivated, and we had the volume this way. And then I can go to folder 2 here by just clicking that. And so there we have our second folder with instead here the filter activated. So we can just switch between the two really easily. So yeah.
And that's all the
Our project, yeah.